It was a Friday evening in January. The sea was calm, the sky was clear. The lights of the Costa Concordia burned bright against the darkness of the Tyrrhenian Sea, a floating city moving slowly through the night. On board, 4,232 people. Passengers in evening clothes, families at dinner, children already in bed, couples on the deck watching the stars, a Filipino musician playing in the main lounge, waiters pouring wine, laughter, music, the gentle rocking of a ship that had sailed these waters 100 times before. Nobody felt afraid. There was no reason to be afraid. In a few minutes, everything would change.
The Costa Concordia was not just a ship, it was a statement. When it was launched in 2004, it was the largest cruise ship ever built in Italy. 290 meters long, 35 meters wide, 17 decks rising from the waterline like a floating skyscraper. It carried the Italian flag to ports across the Mediterranean and beyond. It had restaurants and theaters, swimming pools and spas, a casino, a shopping gallery, a chapel. It was, in every sense of the word, a city on water, a city that moved. For the company that owned it, it was a symbol of Italian craftsmanship and ambition. For the passengers who boarded it, it was the promise of a perfect escape. A few days away from the ordinary world, a few days suspended between sea and sky, where the only concern was what to order for dinner.
It had sailed without incident for 8 years. 8 years of voyages, of ports, of sunrises seen from the deck by thousands of different people. 8 years of the same promise kept, again and again. That January, the Concordia was on a Mediterranean cruise. 7 days, 6 ports. Rome, Savona, Civitavecchia, Cagliari, Palermo, Naples. A route it had sailed dozens of times. The crew knew every mile of it. The captain knew every mile of it. His name was Francesco Schettino. He had been sailing for decades. He had commanded the Concordia for years. He knew the waters around the Tuscan archipelago the way a driver knows a familiar road. And that familiarity, that confidence born from repetition, was about to become the most dangerous thing on the ship. The evening of January 13th, 2012, began like every other evening on board. The passengers had boarded in Civitavecchia that afternoon. By dinner time, the ship was alive with the particular energy of the first night of a cruise, the excitement of people who have just left their ordinary lives behind and have not yet settled into the rhythm of the sea. The restaurants were full, the bars were busy, the theater was preparing for the evening show. Below decks, the crew moved through their routines. The kitchen staff prepared thousands of plates. The entertainers ran final sound checks. The engineers monitored the ship's systems from the control room. Everything was functioning. Everything was normal. On the bridge, Captain Schettino had made a decision. He had done it before. Other captains had done it before him. It was called a salute, an inchino in Italian, a bow. A tradition, informal and unofficial, where a large cruise ship would sail close to a small island or coastal town, near enough for the locals to see the ship in all its illuminated glory, a gesture of greeting from the sea. The island of Giglio, small and beautiful off the Tuscan coast, was on that night's route. Schettino had arranged to pass close, very close. He had contacted a retired captain, a friend who lived on the island. He had told him to watch. At 9:21 in the evening, the Concordia altered course. It turned toward the island. No one among the 4,000 passengers knew.
No one felt the slight change in heading. The music continued. The wine was poured. The children who were still awake pressed their faces against the porthole windows and looked out at the dark water. The island of Giglio grew closer. On the bridge, the officers watched the radar. The rocks around the island were there on the screen. The Scole rocks, clearly marked, clearly dangerous. The ship was too close. The officers knew it. One of them spoke up. The course was altered slightly, but not enough. Not nearly enough. At 9:45, the Concordia was 600 meters from the coast of Giglio. Then it happened.
A sound that no one on board had ever heard before. A sound that no one who heard it would ever forget. Not a crash, not a bang. Something deeper than that. A tearing. As if the sea itself had reached up and grabbed the ship by the hull. The Scole rocks, hidden just beneath the surface, ripped open the starboard side of the Concordia along a length of 70 meters. 70 meters of steel hull opened like a wound. The lights flickered. Glasses fell from the tables. The music stopped. For a moment, the ship was silent. That particular silence that comes just after something terrible, when the mind has not yet caught up with what the body already knows. Then, the questions started. What was that? What happened? Is everything all right? In the dining rooms, passengers looked at each other across their tables. In the corridors, people paused mid-step. In the cabins, those who had been reading or sleeping sat up and listened. On the bridge, the reality was already clear. The hull was open. Water was entering the engine compartments with a speed and force that left no room for doubt. Within minutes, 2 of the ship's 6 engine rooms were flooded. The power fluctuated. The emergency generators kicked in. The lights came back, dimmer now. The warm golden glow of the restaurants replaced by the cold white of emergency lighting. And then, the announcement. A calm voice over the ship's intercom. Measured, reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical problem with the electrical system. There is no cause for alarm. We ask passengers to please return to their cabins. The situation is under control. It was not under control. The Concordia began to list. At first, it was almost imperceptible. A slight tilt to the starboard side. The kind of movement that could be explained away. A wave, a turn, nothing more. But the tilt did not correct itself. It increased. Slowly at first, then faster. By the time the passengers understood what was happening, the floors were no longer level. Chairs slid. Bottles rolled off the bar. The Christmas decorations that still hung in some of the public areas swayed at impossible angles. In the corridors, the scene was changing. People who had calmly returned to their cabins were now back in the hallways, their calm gone. They held on to the walls. They held on to each other. Some were still in their dinner clothes, their elegant evening dress for celebration now grotesque against the background of disaster. Some had managed to grab life jackets. Most had not. The second announcement came. Passengers were instructed to proceed to the muster stations. Life jackets, assembly points, emergency procedures. But by now, the procedures were already compromised. The ship was listing at an angle that made the starboard lifeboats, those on the side closest to the water, impossible to lower. The mechanisms would not work. The boats hung uselessly against the hull. On the port side,
The boats could be lowered, but the angle of the ship made the process terrifying and chaotic. Boats swung out over the dark water. People climbed in. Some boats descended smoothly. Others lurched and tilted, throwing passengers against each other, against the sides, against the rails. The cold was intense. January in the Tyrrhenian Sea. The water temperature was 14 degrees. For anyone who ended up in it, survival time was measured in minutes.
And then there were the others, the ones who did not wait for the lifeboats. Some jumped. They went over the railing and into the black water below, choosing the certainty of cold over the uncertainty of what was happening on the ship. Some swam to the shore of Giglio, less than half a kilometer away, visible now in the darkness, its lights a beacon in the chaos. From the shore, the people of Giglio watched. The island has a permanent population of less than 1,000 people. In January, in winter, even fewer. They had seen the ship come close, closer than usual, some of them had thought. They had watched its lights. And then they had watched those lights tilt. Slowly, terribly, unmistakably. The fishermen were the first to respond. Without orders, without coordination, without training for a disaster of this scale, they got into their boats and went out into the dark. Small fishing boats moving toward the listing colossus. They pulled people from the water. They helped people climb aboard. They made trip after trip, back to the harbor, then out again. Ordinary men doing extraordinary things because there was no one else and there was no time to wait. The Coast Guard arrived. Helicopters came from the mainland, their searchlights cutting through the darkness, finding people on the decks, in the water, clinging to the hull. One Coast Guard officer, Captain Gregorio DeFalco, repeatedly radioed Schettino, who had by this point left the ship. The recording of that exchange, DeFalco ordering Schettino to get back on board, Schettino making excuses, DeFalco's voice rising in disbelief, would be broadcast around the world in the days that followed. Those words became the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Vada a bordo, cazzo. Get back on board.
By morning, the Concordia was on its side. Seen in the cold light of January 14th, the ship was almost impossible to comprehend. 290 meters of steel lying on the rocks of Giglio like a broken toy, its white hull exposed to the air, its lower decks submerged, its funnels pointing not to the sky, but to the sea. The island's small harbor was filled with survivors wrapped in blankets. The streets of the town were crowded with people who had arrived on a cruise and now stood on a winter island with nothing. No luggage, no documents, no shoes. The numbers, when they came, were devastating. 32 people died. 32 people who had boarded that ship in Civitavecchia the previous afternoon, expecting a week of Mediterranean sunshine. Families, couples, a 5-year-old girl. People from Italy, Germany, Hungary, France, Spain, Peru. People who had done nothing wrong. People who had simply chosen to take a cruise. 630 people were injured. Hundreds of millions of people around the world watch the images and ask the same question. How? How could this happen? How in 2012, with all the technology and all the regulations and all the accumulated knowledge of a century of maritime safety, how could a ship this size, carrying this many people, strike a rock that was clearly marked on every chart?
The answer was simple, and it was the oldest answer in the history of human disaster. A man believed the rules did not apply to him. Francesco Schettino was tried. The trial lasted years. The evidence was overwhelming. The unauthorized deviation from the approved course, the late order to abandon ship, the departure from the vessel while passengers were still on board. In 2017, the sentence was confirmed. 16 years in prison for negligent shipwreck, multiple manslaughter, and abandoning ship. The sea had not done this. The rocks had not done this. The ship had not done this. A choice had done this.
But the story of the Concordia did not end in the courtroom. The ship lay on the rocks of Giglio for 2 years. An environmental emergency, a wound in the sea. The fuel in its tanks threatened the marine ecosystem around the island. The wreck itself was unstable, shifting, dangerous. And it was enormous. The largest wreck of a passenger ship since the Titanic, in one of the most environmentally sensitive areas of the Mediterranean. The question of what to do with it seemed, at first, to have no answer. And then the engineers came. What followed was the most complex and ambitious maritime salvage operation ever attempted. Companies from across the world gathered at Giglio. Engineers and divers and technical specialists who had never faced anything like this. The plan they devised? To roll the ship upright using a system of steel platforms and caissons and cables had never been done before. Not at this scale, not in these conditions.
In September 2013, the world watched as the Concordia was slowly, centimeter by centimeter, rolled upright. The operation took 19 hours. When it was complete, and the ship stood vertical again for the first time since that January night, the engineers and divers and workers who had spent months on that operation did not cheer. Some of them wept. In July 2014, the ship was towed to Genoa. It took a week. It moved at walking pace, escorted by tugboats, a ghost ship making its last voyage through waters it had once sailed in triumph. In Genoa, it was dismantled. Piece by piece, deck by deck, the Concordia was taken apart until nothing remained. A ship that had taken 4 years to build was erased in 2. There is something the sea has always known, that humans take a long time to learn. Size is not the same as safety. Speed is not the same as competence. Pride is not the same as wisdom. The Concordia was the largest ship ever built in Italy. It was also, by the smallest and most human of errors, the most spectacular maritime disaster of the modern age. Not a storm, not a mechanical failure, not an act of nature, a decision. A moment of vanity on a calm January night that cost 32 people their lives and scarred an island, a nation, and a maritime industry. Those 32 people woke up on January 13th, 2012, and went about their day. They packed bags, said goodbyes, boarded a ship. They sat down to dinner. They ordered dessert. They had no idea. None of us ever do. The sea does not care about the size of your ship. It never has. It never will. And the moment you forget that, the moment any of us forget that the rules exist not as obstacles, but as the accumulated memory of every disaster that came before, that is the moment the rocks appear beneath the surface. That is the moment the lights begin to flicker. If you believe that stories like this should not be forgotten, stories that carry within them something true about who we are and what we are capable of, both the worst and the best,
subscribe to The Archivist. Every story we tell is a light left on in the dark. Thank you for being here.